Welcome to CNBC's Healthy Returns, featuring the most influential voices in healthcare. Sponsored by Change Healthcare. Now, here's Meg Tirrell.
Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining the Healthy Returns live stream. I'm Meg Tirrell, Senior Health and Science Reporter for CNBC. On this live stream series, we've been talking to public health experts, executives, and researchers who have been helping us understand and get through this pandemic for the last year. And today we're checking in with two of our favorite former guests. Dr. Luciana Borio is Vice President at In-Q-Tel, former Director for Medical and Biodefense Preparedness at the National Security Council, and the former Acting Chief Scientist at the FDA. And Dr. Scott Gottlieb is former Commissioner of the FDA, CNBC contributor, and he also sits on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. Welcome back to both of you. It's so nice to have you here together.
Thank you for having us.
And a reminder to our audience, if you have questions for our speakers, you can submit them using the hashtag HealthyReturns, and we'll get to as many as we can. So I want to start with you guys talking about the CDC guidance this week. I think, it was really highly anticipated. People wanting to know when we can get back to normal after we're fully vaccinated. And Dr. Borio, maybe we'll start with you. Did you think the guidance was what you hoped it would be? Did it go far enough? Did it go too far? What did you think?
I thought it was a good start. It gives fully vaccinated individuals a chance to resume life a little bit. I think it's particularly important for, be able to be with family members and small social groups. I wish that CDC had been a little bit more forward-looking with respect to travel, because we know so much about the safety of travel, especially if it's about traveling to go see a family and be done in a safe manner where there's no really socialization in indoor public spaces, for example, restaurants, bars. But, a lot of people to travel to see loved ones. I would have hoped they would have gone a little bit further than they did.
Dr. Gottlieb, what did you think?
Well, look, I think it's going to be difficult for CDC to give prescriptive guidance for individuals to follow. It's one thing to have very prescriptive guidance when it comes to businesses, municipalities, because it could be enforced with regulation. I think people are people, and they're going to do what they want to do. And a lot of people now, especially people who've been vaccinated, feel like they're at less risk because they are at less risk. And I think the guidance needs to be more general and practical. People who have been fully vaccinated are at reduced risk of contracting COVID, at reduced risk of having a bad outcome from COVID. But reduced risk doesn't mean no risk. And people should still be prudent. They should still try to wear masks where they can in a high prevalence environment. They should still be careful when they're in settings where they could be exposed to the virus. And they should be particularly careful when they're in settings where there are vulnerable people who could contract the virus, because we don't fully understand how much the vaccine reduces transmission. We believe it reduces transmission, but we don't know the magnitude of that. That's the kind of sort of high level, I think, more practical statements that would be helpful to consumers. But trying to be prescriptive about, you can hug one grandchild, but not a grandchild you can hug your grandchild from your daughter, but not your grandchild from your son at the same time. That's just not going to work. So we need to get to more, I think, general, practical, flexible type of recommendations.
Dr. Borio, I have to go back to the travel question, because I've really been wondering about this. My family lives in California, my parents, and they're fully vaccinated. They're still double masking, and they're very conservative. But should they feel comfortable getting on a plane? What do you think the travel guidance should be?
Yes, Meg. So I think that, it's people have to make those decisions for themselves and assume their level of risk. And everybody has a little bit of risk credit in the bank, and you have to use it in a way that is meaningful to you. But I do think that, we know now that traveling with masks and being very careful about your surroundings, especially for people that are vaccinated, is going to be fairly safe, as long as they don't go to the destination and again go into an indoor place to socialize in a bar or restaurant, a higher risk activity. Because again, like Dr. Gottlieb said, because the vaccination reduces the risk, but it doesn't, you still can get it and you still can spread it. So it's not a zero risk reduction. So we need I think that the travel would have been reasonable. And I think in that way, it's a little bit of a missed opportunity, because people really are very much in need of those family connections at this moment.
That is definitely
just to pick
true.
up on
go ahead, Scott.
Just to pick up on what Dr. Borio said, I think that the more that CDC, and I understand, CDC needs to be in a certain place with respect to recommendations, and they're gonna represent a more conservative end of the spectrum in terms of what general guidance is and what behavior is, because we need someone to anchor us after all. But getting to Dr. Borio's observations, I think the more that CDC is out of step where people generally are and what we know they're going to do, the more that the guidance isn't going to really become part of how people factor into something that they factor into their consideration. So I think it's important that it also be practical, that they're not too far out of step where people's sort of aspirations are and where their behavior is. And the reality is, the public rightly senses that the overall vulnerability of the public has been reduced. It's not universal. It's not across all different demographics. We still have a lot of pockets of high-risk individuals that haven't been vaccinated. But vulnerability is coming down. And as vulnerability comes down, that's going to be a metric that we look at, not just prevalence, but what is the overall vulnerability of the population.
We've got a lot of amazing questions from the audience for you guys. And I'm going to start with one that we got from multiple people. So people really want your thoughts on this. And Dr. Gottlieb, I'll start with you. And I also want to hear Dr. Borio's thoughts. They ask, what is your view on delaying the second shot so more people get a first dose more quickly, like the UK has done? Dr. Gottlieb, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I don't think we should be doing that. I don't think we fully understand what the durability is of the immunity without the second dose with the mRNA vaccines. Those are the vaccines that are 2-dose vaccines. They've been studied as 2-dose vaccines. There is protection after the first dose. The data sort of demonstrates that. It appears to be better in younger people than older people. But I think we should be delivering the second dose. I think it's also going to be hard to take a system that's been geared towards delivering 2 doses now, where we've kind of set up this elaborate infrastructure to do that, and suddenly either delay the second dose or say we're going to figure out when we're going to give you the second dose down the road. Just trying to rejigger the system to orient it around the delivery of 1 dose would take weeks. And it's really not going to extend the supply in time to actually get more vaccines in arms. I mean, this is something, if we wanted to contemplate this, we should have done it 2 months ago. The reality is, I think we're right on the cusp of there being more supply than demand. I think as we get into April, we're going to have ample supply and there's going to be general availability of the vaccine. So we'll basically be doing this for this 3-week period when we're still in this kind of situation where we're rationing the vaccine and we wouldn't even get it implemented in time. So I think the opportunity to have this debate has come and gone.
Dr. Borio, your thoughts on that, and also Scott's prediction that we're going to all be able to make a vaccine appointment by April. Do you think that's realistic?
Well, I completely agree with him on this position about the second dose. I don't think we should be delaying that at all. And we know that the first dose affords a level of protection, but the second dose really kind of cinches that immune response. And this is particularly important in the setting where we have emerging variants. That we need that extra protection. So this is not the time to undo a very sound scientific policy that we have in place. When we're going to have a vaccine for all, I guess, I was really happy to see this morning that Alaska is the first state to offer vaccine to all who are 16 years of age or older. And I'm very hopeful. I don't know exactly. I'm not willing to make a strong bet on a specific date, Meg. But we're getting closer and closer each day, and that's just wonderful.
Definitely. Dr. Borio, what are your thoughts on vaccines for kids? How important is getting kids vaccinated? When do you think a realistic timeline for that might be?
That's a question that my kids ask me every day because they really want to be vaccinated as soon as possible. Maybe because they live in a household where we're very much pro-vaccine and they are being left out because of their age. So, and availability right now. But there are about 73 million children and adolescents in America. So we do need to vaccinate kids sooner than later. And the companies have now enrolled trials that are studying the vaccine in kids that are 12 years of age and older. And I think that by the fall, we'll be able to have more likely vaccines that are authorized for that age group, and then soon to follow vaccines in the younger children as well. So it can't come too soon. There's a huge urgency to be able to begin immunizing children, especially as the vaccine supply becomes, is resolved and we have ample supply. We shouldn't be, we have to move very aggressively to be able to get vaccine to children as soon as we have that data from these clinical trials that are being done.
Just to build on Dr. Borio's point, I think there's going to be a policy call that has to be made here. Obviously, the science and the medicine is going to inform what we do, and we need to have the trials that demonstrate that the vaccines are safe and effective in that population, the 12 and over population. Pfizer's fully enrolled the trial. Moderna is currently enrolling the trial, as best I recall. And so we will have data in the fall from trials looking at 12 and over, but ultimately it's going to be a policy call. And I think the policy call is going to be, what social compartment do we want to put the vaccine into? Do we put it into a high school age population, get it in 9th through 12th grade? Do we try to put it into middle school, junior high school? I don't think it's going to be available for 12 and under. I don't think we're going to be putting the vaccine into grade school age kids this year. It's a 2022 event at the earliest, assuming something dramatic doesn't change with the virus. But I think the real debate's going to be around high school. The Pfizer vaccine, as you know, I'm on the board of Pfizer, is approved for 16 and over, so it's already partially in the high school age population. The question is, are we going to fully put it in that high school age population? That would be the most likely social compartment, because that's where we've seen outbreaks in high school settings, more outbreaks in that setting. We know that older kids are more vulnerable to the infection, more likely to catch and transmit the infection. So that would be the most likely place to put it. I suspect, Meg, if I'm looking out to the future, I think some of the hesitation is probably going to be ACIP. I think that this is going to be a difficult decision for the group that advises CDC around pediatric and adolescent vaccinations on whether they're going to make a recommendation to do that. And I would think that that's going to be where the debate ends up focusing around what ACIP does with respect to that recommendation. Whether they make the recommendation for back to school or whether we just have the data to support the recommendation in our back pocket and see how the school year goes.
ACIP being the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, that group that votes on what vaccines should be used in which settings. Dr. Borio, I'm curious your thoughts on that. And I guess just to make sure I understand the implications of the ACIP weighing in here. I mean, if they said, okay, we've got the data, it supports use in kids, 12 to 16 or whatever it is, 12 to 15. Does that then trigger schools possibly requiring the vaccine for kids to come in? I mean, what are the implications of that?
Well, and I think it'd be very difficult, Meg, for these vaccines to be required, because we have to remember they're still considered investigational vaccines by the US FDA. They are authorized under an emergency use authorization, but they're not fully approved. So until there's vaccine mandates are already such a controversial issue. I hope that we don't have to really, vaccines are such an incredible good that we ought to be able to have people being willing to take them to protect themselves and protect their loved ones. So I hope we don't end up in a situation of mandate. And I can't imagine that would be the case.
Another question from the audience, Dr. Gottlieb, we'll go to you with this. When will we know about transmissibility of COVID-19 from vaccinated to unvaccinated people? When will we know? I think there are some hints maybe that the vaccines do reduce transmission. When will we know for sure and the extent to which they do?
Yeah, I think the conventional wisdom right now is that they reduce transmission, that we've seen enough data to support the concept that they're reducing transmission. And it's just a question of the magnitude of the reduction in transmission of infection. And obviously, these vaccines end up having substantial impact on reducing the ability of people who get subclinical infection to spread the infection, to spread the SARS-2 infection. That's going to be a profound public health tool. These vaccines gain a substantial public health importance if they're able to actually reduce transmission. I think a lot of the data that's going to fully inform this question is going to be real world evidence. And a lot of it's probably going to come out of Israel, where they're actually looking at this question, collecting data on a prospective basis, and they have good data capture. They have now a largely vaccinated population. So I would think that we're going to turn the card on some studies in the next 4 to 6 weeks that's going to more definitively answer this question. Whether it answers it to the point that you're going to get some language into the label is another question. But I think in terms of informing sort of the public health perception of the vaccines and how they can be used most effectively, we're going to have an answer within the next 4 to 6 weeks around some of these questions. More definitive answer, not a final answer.
Dr. Borio, another question from the audience we got multiple versions of for you. Do you expect COVID-19 shots to become a yearly vaccine like flu shots? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be an yearly vaccine shot, but I fully expect that we'll need to have booster shots periodically to be able to maintain a high level of protection. And
what about the variants? I mean, how concerned are you, Dr. Borio, I'll go back to you on that, and then to Dr. Gottlieb, that we will need to revamp the vaccines for the variants, or that we'll need boosters to stay ahead of them and just keep our immune response high?
Sure. So the variants are a big unknown. And right now, I think the evidence points that to the fact that these vaccines remain really protective, highly protective against most of the variants. And the numbers in the US are fairly low for the variants, but we need to, it really is a race to vaccinate right now. We need to be able to vaccinate as many people as possible. And I want to say, Meg, that a lot of people think that because they already had COVID, that they're now protected from subsequent infection of the variants. And the data does not suggest that for the variants. If the immune response generated by the vaccine is protective to a certain extent, but the immune response generated by a natural infection with the more ancestral original strains did not seem to afford much protection. So it's really critical for people that have had COVID to also seek vaccination.
Another question from the audience, I'll send this one to you, Dr. Gottlieb. How likely do you think it'll be we can develop a universal vaccine against COVID that will not need updating and will effectively protect against both future and current variants that may emerge?
Yeah, I mean, just stepping back on the variants a little bit, I think one of the unknown questions, I'd be curious, Dr. Borio's opinion on this, is how much B.1.1.7 is going to crowd out some of the variants? Is there partial protection against the variants, or more, or more significant protection against the variants for people who've been infected with B117, because B117 is going to become the majority of the infection in the United States. And the question is, do some of the viral epitopes on B117 provide more robust immunity against the variants? And I think that that's a question that's getting debated right now. And that'll help sort of inform whether or not these variants, how much of a foothold they can gain in this country. Right now, they're not that prevalent when you look at the sequencing data. I think we're doing a reasonable job sequencing samples now so we can have a sense of how prevalent they are. And it's not clear that they're more fit. It may be the case that 1351 and P1 gain a foothold in populations because they're able to pierce prior immunity, and people who've been infected already are able to get reinfected, and that's the advantage that they have, but they're not necessarily more contagious in the way 117 is. I think what you would try to do in developing a new variant vaccine is try to develop a consensus sequence. So develop a mRNA sequence that codes for the production of a protein that bakes in a lot of the different variation that we've seen in the virus. You wouldn't just develop a new variant vaccine for 1351 or P1. You'd try to include as many aspects of the new viral epitopes being expressed by these new variants as possible, to the extent you can. I mean, it becomes complex to come up with a synthetic sequence that codes for a protein that has that level of complexity. So it wouldn't necessarily be a universal vaccine, but whatever you do come up with respect to a variant vaccine is going to try to bake in a lot of different aspects of the changes that the virus has undergone, as many as possible. So it's not just going to be the 1351 strain turned into a vaccine. It's going to be some hybrid. I think we're likely to see a situation where a lot of people do end up getting another vaccine this fall, either a booster of the existing vaccines, so they have peak immune protection heading into the fall, winter COVID season, when we're likely to see this virus try to reemerge. Or if the trials are done and they demonstrate that the new variant vaccines are safe and effective and provide more robust protection from the old Wuhan strain, the wild type strain, as well as new variants, maybe those vaccines are substituted in. I think one of the advantages of that, and the reason why public health officials might sort of push in that direction, is it kind of gets everyone on the same schedule. It cleans up what we've gone through right now, which is that everyone's been vaccinated at a different time. I mean, the most vulnerable people were vaccinated first, so their immunity will be waning in the fall, the winter, if the immunity from these vaccines don't persist for a long period of time. And maybe the younger, healthier people will be vaccinated closer to the fall. You'll probably want to get everyone on a predictable schedule if we have to reboost every year, and this fall will provide an opportunity to do that. At the very least, I think we're going to be revaccinating the most vulnerable population heading into the fall and the winter.
Another question about vaccines, and I have one more on vaccines, and then there's lots of questions about what life is going to look like, sort of going forward, what the vaccines will enable. So, Dr. Borio, for you, how should we interpret the reactions to the vaccines? I was talking with Moncef Slaoui from the leader of Operation Warp Speed, who's now not doing that anymore, but he got his vaccine. He said he had a really strong reaction to the second one, and he was like, yay, a great immune response. So if people feel a strong reaction after the second dose in particular of the mRNA vaccines, is that a good thing? And what does it mean if they don't get a strong response after the second dose?
I know. I don't know for sure. I mean, these vaccines are extraordinarily effective. And I know that we like to think that if we get a little sore the next day, that it's because it's getting a better immune system response. I'm not sure that's the case, but it still feels good. That's how I interpreted my reactions to my second dose. It felt like a really good workout, and now I'm sore the next day. I feel very accomplished. But,
yeah.
A good workout for your immune system.
I wouldn't interpret too much from the reaction you get to the vaccine on the robustness of the immune response you're deriving. I remember when I was going through chemotherapy, I didn't lose my hair, and I was very worried that it meant the chemotherapy wasn't working. And I found the one study that correlated outcomes in the cancer I had with people who didn't lose their hair from the chemotherapy. And I remember it had me really worried. I wouldn't correlate, how you sort of respond to the vaccine with what level of immune protection you're getting. Because the reality is, when you look at the clinical data, most people in the trials didn't develop a strong reaction to the vaccines. And so most people found it fairly tolerable.
Those are great points. I want to ask you both about hesitancy or questions people may have about getting the vaccines. I've seen that maybe vaccine hesitancy is not the right word to be using around this, but for folks who are not lining up and thinking about moving to Alaska to get their vaccine now, what do you expect that to start to to look like? When do you think, we'll hit that threshold that Dr. Gottlieb has talked about, where we go from, it being a supply problem to a demand problem? And what do you think is happening now to work on that? And will it succeed? Dr. Borio, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so the Biden administration has expressed a strong intent in launching a very robust communications campaign to be able to target the vaccine, the different components, the vaccine hesitancy to the different groups. We know now that they come in very many different shapes and forms. It's not just one type of vaccine anxiety or hesitancy. And it will take a lot of work to be able to get people to roll up their sleeves. One interesting study, for example, showed that the hesitancy that is perceived to exist in people of color, a lot of it is actually linked to the perceived lack of access to a vaccine. So people don't think they can have access. They say that they are more hesitant to get the vaccine. And they're going to be working on all that. So I'm confident, I'm hopeful that we will, we're not going to be able to eliminate it completely, but we'll be able to reduce the degree of hesitancy going forward. As more people are vaccinated, more people have good stories to tell, society begins to reopen more fully. I think people will want to be part of this deal too, to get vaccinated.
Dr. Gottlieb?
Yeah, look, I think Dr. Borio makes an excellent point about access. I think we need to find ways to simplify access, especially in harder to reach communities. Just open up vaccination sites that don't require an appointment. People can just show up. A lot of people have difficulty getting online, difficulty scheduling an appointment because they don't know what their schedule is going to look like. Their work doesn't allow them to come 9 to 5. And so I think we need to make it easier for people in communities where we know people have more obstacles, sort of going online, scheduling an appointment, to just be able to show up and get a vaccine. Pushing it out through some of the big box stores and the community pharmacies, I think, is going to address some of that. So I don't think that the component that's hesitant is as big as we think it is. I think it's more a component of people where it needs to be a little bit more convenient, a little bit more accessible, and we'll get better uptake rates. If you look at last year, we vaccinated about 125 million Americans for the flu vaccine. I think that that's your sort of target population, 125 million adults. I think we'll get there. I think we'll get above it. I think once we get to 150 million adults vaccinated, and I think we could get there, it's going to be hard. Every percent above that, we're going to really have to struggle for. And we haven't really invested in educating people about this vaccine and stimulating demand because we didn't have enough vaccine to satisfy the existing demand. There was way more demand than supply. We're going to start to try to stimulate demand, but I worry it's a little late. I think, you needed to be doing this all the way through. It's not something you can just turn on. These messages needed to be woven through all the way through the process. And so I worry that as we get into May, we may find vaccination rates start to really come down because remember, we're going to be vaccinating a less vulnerable population against the backdrop of rapidly declining prevalence in the summertime. And so people may not be as, likely to come out and get vaccinated. A lot of younger people who will now be eligible say, you know what, maybe I'll wait until the fall to get vaccinated. So I think we're going to run into a situation where it's going to get harder to vaccinate as we head into the summer. We're going to have to do more to try to stimulate demand.
Well, we've got another viewer question from somebody who I think pays a lot of attention when you talk, Dr. Gottlieb, because this is very specific, and I've heard you say this. Can Dr. Gottlieb explain his view that our path is nonlinear? That's a Dr. Gottlieb phrase, and his concerns about next fall and winter and the possible need to reinstate precautions. Why would those vaccinated need to be concerned about planning in-person events and pulling back from mass gatherings in December and January? Is this concern only if there are new variants? That's from Susan Ellingstad.
Yeah, I mean, when I say it's nonlinear, it's that I think the spring's going to continue to improve. We'll probably go out and take our masks off sooner than we should, but we're Americans. We do that. And the summer, I think, is going to be relatively quiet with respect to this infection. I think prevalence is likely to decline, and people who are worried about it are likely to be vaccinated. So people will feel comfortable going out and re-engaging in normal activity. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand to try to do normal things again. But, as we head into the late fall and the winter, this is going to resurge. We're going to see virus circulate again. Maybe it doesn't become a raging epidemic across the country. I don't think it will. But we're going to see pockets of outbreak, and we're going to see prevalence levels increase. And I think, notwithstanding the fact that vulnerable people will hopefully be vaccinated, and we may even revaccinate people so they have more immunity heading into the winter, there will be new variants. They might pierce some of that immunity better than the current variants are piercing the immunity. And there'll be a lot of people who won't be vaccinated as well. And it's going to spread among them. Kids are unlikely to be vaccinated. There might be outbreaks in schools. So I think there could be enough infection in the late fall and the winter that we reimpose some measures. I don't think we're going to close things down again. We're not going to mandate masks again, but you could see recommendations for wearing masks. You could see limitations on things like bars or restaurants, precautions taken, distancing reimposed, things like that. I think you could see holiday parties in December canceled. I don't think anyone's going to be jamming 200 people into a small room in the back of a restaurant for a holiday party on December 20th. I think we're going to be doing things differently this winter, implementing more respiratory precautions in how we go about doing our work. I could see fourth quarter board meetings being canceled and being Zoom meetings. So I think it's nonlinear in that sense. I don't think we could say, it's going to get normal by Christmas time. I think Christmas time may be the time when we're starting to, slow down a little bit and take some caution.
Dr. Borio, do you agree with that outlook? And then I guess my question is, when do we get out of that cycle of like summers are great, winters are kind of terrible again? Like, when do we just go back to real normal? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, it will happen. It absolutely will happen. I can tell you that. But I agree that there's not like one magic day that will happen. And the sooner we vaccinate, if we can, everybody's exhausted, we can keep the masks on for a little longer, if we can avoid the congregate settings a little longer, we're so close, I think. And I'm very hopeful that, I'm hopeful, really optimistic that fall and winter, depending on how much vaccination we have, how much actual vaccinations, not vaccines, we have headed into the fall, that we'll be able to manage it. And it will begin to feel like this crisis is over. And hopefully, by early next year, we'll feel like our lives are, traumatized, but back to normal. The trauma is going to last a little longer. I mean, I think it's incredible what we have gone as a globe and as a nation.
The other piece of this, Megan, you reported on this the other day, is the other piece of this is whether we get a small molecule inhibitor of viral replication that's non-toxic and effective. That could be a real game changer in how we approach this and how we reduce risk. And you reported on this on the air the other day. We haven't even baked that into any of our considerations. And it's a real possibility we turn over the card. There's several products in late stage development that could prove to be safe and effective in the treatment of COVID and the prevention of progression. So that would be a real game changer if we can get that heading into the fall, the winter.
Well, thank you for watching my reporting. One of the more advanced molecules there, of course, is Merck's molnupiravir. You said non-toxic. I mean, some folks were worried that it could be mutagenic, meaning it could potentially cause cancer, although Merck said in an update over the weekend that it didn't look like that it was. Do you think that compound will succeed, or one from Atia that's in phase 2, partnered with Roche? Is this kind of a near-term thing? Can we actually get there?
Well, I think we're going to turn over the card on these trials. The Merck compound, I think it failed the Ames test. That's why it had that sort of cloud over it. But it looks active. You have Fuji studying their drug in a big phase 3 trial. They're going to turn over the card. They put it in the right setting, which was early disease. And so we'll finally have a definitive answer around that compound, the one that you mentioned, the T. I think those are the 3 furthest along where you're going to turn over cards on definitive trials that could, yield a result that answers the question whether or not any one of these can work. So, it's possible. I haven't followed the data closely enough, but this isn't a virus that's so complex that replicates in a way that we shouldn't be able to drug it. There's always the question of being able to interfere with viral replication in ways that don't have off-target effects on human biology. But this should be a druggable target. I think we will figure out a way to get a potent small molecule inhibitor of viral replication in the setting of this coronavirus at some point, and we could be for the fall.
Well, I'm told half an hour has already passed. This has been amazing to get to hear from both of you. I guess I'll just ask, for some final thoughts from you both, Dr. Borio, what would you like to leave folks with?
We are so close to victory, so let's hang in there for a little longer. I'm looking forward to coming back in the future, Meg, so we can talk about something that is not COVID related. So that's my goal for the next year.
Oh my gosh, me too. On the 2-year anniversary of the pandemic, I hope we're not, still sitting in our attics. At least that's where I am. Dr. Gottlieb, your final thoughts.
I would just echo Dr. Borio's thoughts. I think this is the month that we sit at the cusp of two paradigms. One, the raging epidemic we went through in February, and two, I think April, May, June are going to look very good, and we just need to try to be cautious in other months so we don't take too much infection into the summer and sort of snatch away some of the victories that we should be able to gain this summertime.
All right, Dr. Gottlieb, Dr. Borio, great messages to end on. Thank you both so much for being here for this.
Thanks a lot.
All right, and everybody, thank you for watching. Please join us for our Healthy Returns Summit coming up on May 11th. We'll take stock of everything we've learned over the last year and explore the breakthroughs leading us into a new era of innovation for the healthcare industry. For more information and to register, visit cnbcevents.com/healthyreturns. And a reminder to visit planyourvaccine.com for information on the vaccine rollout in your state, plus an interactive tool that can help you figure out where and when you can get vaccinated. Everybody, take care and thanks.